Greetings, everyone. This is Jed Schlackman. I'm a spiritual healer and holistic counselor in Miami, Florida. In this video presentation, I will be covering a topic that I refer to here as psychopaths, spiritual catalysts, and the law of attraction. This is a subject that's rather multifaceted. It's complex. While it will offer many deep insights into our lives, into the relationships we have, both individually as well as the dynamics that are present in mass consciousness and in society as a whole. To begin with, I would like to look at the definition or description of the term psychopath. In psychology, we have different types of personalities, and there are specific personality disorders which are given labels in the psychological or psychiatric field. Traditionally, the terms psychopath and sociopath were used. However, the clinical term used nowadays is antisocial personality. Psychopaths and sociopaths would be different parts of that category or that continuum. A narcissistic personality would also fall along that spectrum. People that display these antisocial traits are best described as people who act with a lack of empathy. So their behavior involves having little or no compassion or concern for the feelings, for the welfare of others. Most human beings display a lot of emotion and connection with other people. So they have a bond with their fellow human beings, and sort of instinctively people will have care or concern when another person is experiencing some type of pain, discomfort, or distress. A person who lies at the extreme end of this continuum of psychopathy would not have that seemingly normal human compassion. There are a variety of reasons why someone might exhibit that behavior. In some cases, a person can be trained or conditioned to become psychopathic. However, in most cases, it's, in a sense, a defense mechanism or a coping pattern that developed in response to a very early traumatic experience. We'll go into a little more depth about that, but that's really the primary root cause of why someone might become psychopathic. Now, not everyone who is psychopathic has the appearance of what the general public would think of as psychopathic, so they're not all openly violent or aggressive. They're not all out there killing people. However, they do tend to behave in a very self-absorbed and often manipulative way. In relationships, that person is very good at hooking in another person to play a role of victim in their relationship. We'll get into that and understand why the law of attraction explains very well how this happens, why it happens, and in a sense how it's ultimately something valuable. I use the term spiritual catalyst in the title of this presentation because I would look at every relationship that we have as a potential catalyst for our personal growth. So if there is a situation or circumstance that we are confronting that is challenging us, it's actually there to help us gain greater self-awareness and to help us grow and evolve, to bring to our attention something within ourself that needs to be addressed, some distortion or imbalance that we carry within our own consciousness. Those distortions and imbalances typically get created or developed as a result of stresses and traumas in our lives and the way that we adapt or cope with those circumstances. In relationships, people who are narcissistic, people who are sociopathic and or psychopathic tend to connect with other people who are kind of the codependent type, the person who is very needy. If we were to define codependence, a common trait of codependent people is that they appear very needy, very insecure. So the codependent person is in a way desperate to have the approval of another person. They're desperate to have that relationship, that bond, and they may, in some cases, play the martyr role, so they're often self-sacrificing. They are catering to another person. Often they think they can heal the other person, that they can heal their abuser. Of course, when someone is in that situation, it's often an addictive cycle. It continues to perpetuate itself. And it's really a sign or symptom that the person who is codependent is actually lacking in boundaries and lacking in self-love. So their feeling of self-worth or value is inappropriately attached to their sense that they're showing kindness or compassion to other people, when really they haven't recognized or embodied the idea that they need to care for themselves first. On the other hand, the person who is the psychopath, the person who is extremely narcissistic, that person also has a lack of self-love. Often they were abused or neglected at a very young age. In fact, in just about every case you would find that. Yet their way of adapting or coping with that is not to try to appease or to seek validation and approval from the other person, but in fact to be able to manipulate other people and to not have compassion for others. So just as there is a lack of empathy or compassion shown to them, they recapitulate that role of the person who lacks compassion or empathy. So they take on the same role in a sense as the person who abused or mistreated them. This is something that is actually very hard to treat therapeutically, because the person who is the psychopath considers their pattern of behavior and consciousness to be normal. They don't recognize or acknowledge that anything is wrong with themselves, so they're not really seeking to change or to heal themselves. And they're also deeply suppressing or repressing the original pain or trauma that they experienced. So they're not even feeling or recognizing their own emotions. They're in a sense cutting themselves off from their emotions so that they can't feel other people's pain and also so that they can't feel their own pain, which they have very deep within their consciousness. In relationships, these people are attracted or drawn to one another because they represent the complementary opposite forms of how a person might cope with having been abused or neglected. In this sense, they're observing a reflection of their own unhealed trauma. And they're also being shown an aspect of themselves, either in its same reflection or its polar opposite reflection. The codependent, needy person is being shown the opposite of themselves in that sense. So they are overly sensitive, overly emotionally needy, whereas the person abusing or mistreating them is overly disconnected from their feelings and lacking compassion. This, as I said, is the law of attraction in action. So these people are naturally, metaphysically, in that sense, drawn to one another in order to hopefully at some point bring to their awareness the distortion or imbalance in their own functioning, in their own consciousness. For the codependent person, for the person who is excessively needy and insecure, it's very important to realize that they've developed that trait, that coping pattern, in a sense for a positive purpose. So they are seeking to experience love and connection. They're just doing it, in a sense, in a confused way. A way that might have seemed functional when they were a child, when that attuning to the needs of the abusive person did get them some form of approval or validation. However, now it's creating a rather destructive cycle where they never get any lasting love or validation. They're just going through these cycles of being abused or neglected and being unable to detach from that relationship. So for that person, it's very important to practice self-love, to find self-worth and validation independent of the relationship. For the person who is the psychopath, the extremely narcissistic person, for them to really begin a healing process, they would have to allow their own original pain and trauma to start to surface. So to get through these layers of shielding they've created that keep those emotions from being accessed. One way that this could happen is if that person is no longer able to carry out their psychopathic type of manipulation, if they're really confronted with their behavior and people disconnect from them and no longer give them that opportunity to manipulate, to feed off of the energy of someone else. So if you cut the cord, so to speak, if you pull the plug on their psychic vampirism, then they may start to really face themselves. A person who engages in this psychopathic and sociopathic behaviors, who is, for example, arrested, convicted of a crime, cut off from society and from any opportunity to manipulate others, they're now given this opportunity to look at themselves, to face their own pain, their own psychological suffering that they have been avoiding. They've been avoiding it by actually causing suffering to others. But now that they can no longer play that role of making others suffer, they really don't have many options left, and they may actually begin to face their own pattern, their own pain, their own unhealed wounds. Therefore, it's in the best interests of everyone concerned if the people who are playing those codependent victim roles do break free and step out of that role, because that gives them the opportunity to heal, and it also presents a situation where the person playing the abuser, playing the narcissist or psychopathic role, may have no other option now than to actually face their own emotions. There's no guarantee that that will happen on the side of the psychopath, but it does create an increased potential for that to occur if the person who they've been manipulating is able to truly break free. So, ironically, the person who's been sticking with them, staying with that abuser, believing that they can somehow help that person heal, that their love and kindness and compassion can lead that hurtful person to change, it didn't work. So it's important to see that by breaking free, that's the way you can actually foster the potential for the other person to heal. Only by healing yourself are you giving the other person in that dynamic the opportunity to face themselves and heal themselves. So you don't help them heal by staying with them, you help them heal by breaking free and doing your own self-healing work. This is really very important for people to understand, since many people do stay in relationships because they feel they don't want to hurt the other person, when in reality they're just perpetuating this cycle of hurt and abuse by staying in the relationship. I know that it can be very difficult to face the fears, to face the insecurities that will come up with being alone, with not having the partner that you've been playing this rather dysfunctional game or dance with. But inevitably that is the solution, that you really have to break free. Now, I've talked about this mainly in the context of our individual personal relationships, particularly those that people would consider intimate relationships, although these relationships aren't always the romantic or intimate type. They could be a parent, child, brother and sister, boss and employee, co-workers. All these types of relationships can include these types of dynamics where there is an abuser or neglector and a victim or codependent. Now I would like to carry this topic to a broader level, to the level of our society as a whole. Since most human beings do have some of these dysfunctions to some degree, since we have had some form of abuse or neglect in our early development, you really don't see many people who are fully healthy and functional, fully balanced and whole. So as a society, we tend to project out these same dynamics with our institutions, with our systems of power and control. Most systems in our society are designed in a hierarchical often a pyramid-like manner, where there are people at the top of a system who hold the power and control over others, and they're often playing the role of the psychopath, the people who are atop that pyramid of power. And the people at the bottom of that power structure are often playing the role of the victims, of the codependents. They're often staying within a dysfunctional system. They're codependently giving their power to the people who are abusing them, who are mistreating them in some way. It's very useful to look at our social, political, and economic systems in this way to begin to understand why things continue the way they are. People often complain about the sociopathic or psychopathic nature of many of the leaders who are in the position of governing our society. People talk about the bankers, the politicians, the dark occult groups, and all of that. And those are very real circumstances. Yet if we want to empower ourselves, we can see that those are spiritual catalysts for all of us. They're there to help each of us recognize how we all have these codependent tendencies, how we tend to give away our power to those who are abusing or neglecting us, rather than really truly loving and empowering ourselves. We expect something from that person or entity that is mistreating us. We expect them to give us love, to give us validation, to give us some material comfort, whatever that might be, rather than each of us taking charge to empower ourselves to do the things for ourselves that will give us what we truly desire, to give ourselves the love that we want, to give ourselves the confidence, the feeling of worth, the sense of validation. That's really up to us and not something that we want to continually seek from some power or some institution or person outside of ourselves. In fact, the more that we truly love, the way that we truly value ourselves, the more we're able to do that, the more it will be reflected back to us in how other people treat us. If we find that there are many people around us mistreating us, that's often a reflection of our own lack of self-worth, our own lack of self-love. So let those external circumstances be reminders, reflections. Let them be catalysts for our own spiritual growth. Rather than continuing to play the victim, continuing to blame other people for our unhappiness, for our lack of joy or lack of success in life, we need to turn things around and realize that we are being shown those seemingly negative circumstances are actually there as gifts from the Creator, from our higher selves, to call our attention to the aspects of our own consciousness that we may wish to heal. I encourage each of you to be willing to explore your own feelings and emotions, your own past experiences, your own traumas, and to work on healing those. As we go through this healing work, as we learn to love ourselves and embrace our own values, our own joy, our own essence, which is that we are each a unique part or reflection, a unique expression of the Creator's potential. As we do that, we transform ourselves and what we perceive in the world around us will also transform. So change begins within. As I've said in some of my other videos, we need to start with ourselves rather than expecting the world around us to change in order to give ourselves permission to change. We kind of look at things backwards, and it's time for each of you to start to make these changes yourself, to realize that your life will improve or become more as you would like it to be when you make these internal shifts. And so the psychopaths, the sociopaths, the narcissistic people that we see in our personal lives and in society around us are there truly as spiritual catalysts. Everyone has their part or role to play. We're all, in a sense, wounded and fragmented. We've developed a variety of ways to cope with that and adapt or adjust to it. But now we have the opportunity to reintegrate ourselves, to reconnect with our wholeness, and to restore balance and harmony to ourselves. I appreciate each of you for taking the time to view this video, for having the desire to transform yourself, the desire to make the world a better place, which of course begins with your own transformation. Anyone who would like to learn more about these topics is encouraged to watch more of my videos, to visit my website at www.phinsights.com. And finally, I would like to share a little anecdote, a little synchronicity that occurred in relation to this video topic. I had been formulating, pondering, putting out this video, and I had the title in my mind, that of Psychopaths, Spiritual Catalysts, and the Law of Attraction. And as I was preparing to go ahead and film this, I was at a gathering of some fellow metaphysically minded friends who were into these subjects, and one of the individuals in that group of friends was offering a potential video for the group to watch and discuss. That video happened to be a video with the spiritual teacher Teal Swan, and Teal was in a dialogue with a psychotherapist named Ross Rosenberg, and the topic of their discussion was narcissists and codependents, and how they are sort of magnetically attracted to one another for the purpose of this process of building self-awareness and hopefully healing the wounds that we carry. So that would be also a valuable video for those interested in this subject to view. You can find that video on YouTube, and also you can find other videos on related topics that Teal and Ross have put out. Once again, I appreciate each of you. Wish everyone a very good day. Namaste.